Thank you, Joseph, for talking to us. Before I ask you about the events of the 24th of June 1978, can you tell us a bit about your own activism and politics?
Okay, well, my activism begins rather strangely. It begins as a teenager when I was back in Malta. I was part of a Catholic organization called Society of Christian Doctrine in Malta, is known as Tal Museo. And during that time, there was a Labour government who was trying to secularize Malta. And I, of course, did not belong to the side of the Labour Party, but I belonged to the side of the church. And so the church, the narrative of the church was that the Labour Party was trying to turn Malta into a communist country, and the priests would be persecuted. And of course, no, we didn't like that. So I used to attend demonstrations organized by the church junta. I also used to sell as a voluntary person the newspaper called El Hadim, the Worker, which was a newspaper of the young Christian workers. So that was my initial foray into activism of any kind. My father would have killed me, I think, if he saw me in street corners selling newspapers for something he probably did not support. So that was very strange. I then joined the Franciscans, and I would have left probably in 72, and I came out as a gay man at the end of 72 at the home of Peter Bonsul-Boone and Peter Duarte. My first act of activism is rather interesting. I used to join members of Cross Section, which was the Christian group within Kemp, on the regular raids of public toilets. What did we used to do there? We used to go there and we used to have in our pockets the phone a friend stickers. So we used to descend, and I remember descending on Wynyard public toilet. We used to descend on public toilets. We would all enter different cubicles and we would stick these stickers on. Phone a Friend was, of course, the counselling service of Kemp. So that was my first form of activism. In addition to that, I attended demonstrations, attended homosexual conferences. I wore badges at work and at university, and they were quite blatant badges. I also wore a style of clothing that screamed out, "I am gay," platform shoes, snakeskin and all that stuff. So in a way, that was all form of my activism. I actually have here a brooch which I used to wear publicly, which is very, very Kemp. I mean, you wouldn't be seen dead with it nowadays, but 70s was different. I was also involved in writing, so I used to join other writers, poets, and read publicly. For example, at Martin Place, Central Street Gallery. So that was my form of activism. It was sort of between writing and political activism.
How did you come to be involved in the events of the 24th of June 1978?
I was a regular at Kemp. So we basically knew what was happening. You see, one of the things that's the story that's not being told is the role of Kemp in organizing Mardi Gras. I'm not talking about the International Homosexual Solidarity Day, but the Mardi Gras itself. The Mardi Gras itself was a creation of Kemp. And I don't care what anybody says, that was even the very fact that it was called a festival, in the poster, is itself interesting. In 1972, Kemp was trying to be part of the Waratah Festival in New South Wales. They even had their own Waratah princess. Then they tried to be part of the South Sydney Festival, the Sydney Festival. So Kemp had this involvement, with different festivals. But as you know, the idea was formed by Ron Austin. It could not have been formed by people whom many of us regarded as being on the fringe of the movement, because they were all about protest. So that's how I got to know about it.
Were you involved in the protest in the morning?
Yes, I can now confidently say yes. As I was explaining earlier on, I mean, we attended many demonstrations and we just didn't, take notes and write down where we attended. I thought for a while that I didn't attend the morning demonstration until I saw a video by Stuart Round, and then all of a sudden I saw my head going across, and I said, well, I was there. Mardi Gras was an event that you couldn't miss because it was just so different from the rest. It was a celebration as against a protest. Kemp did have some elements of celebration. For example, I'm trying to remember the name of the person, the father of the wife of Malcolm Turnbull. He's the one who actually tried to decriminalise homosexuality in New South Wales, and there were some members of the Liberal Party objecting to that, and there was Kemp organised a protest, and if my memory serves me right, that was the first protest. And there was an element of frivolity in that, helium balloons and that sort of thing. So that, Kemp was also about fun.
That morning march, that morning protest, what was the atmosphere like?
Well, the atmosphere would have been the same as any other protest. You see, the whole point with when one looks at the demonstrations and protests that used to occur, one has to look, first of all, at where they occurred and when they occurred. Okay, they occurred during the day, not during the night time as Mardi Gras. They did not occur in some little street called Oxford Street, which was full of puffs and dykes, okay? They occurred in the middle of the city, usually a Saturday morning, so that straight men and women, straight parents and their children could lock eyes with gay men. You see, we find it, and lesbians, I must not forget that, because I'll be heavily criticised. But the whole point is we tend to forget that in the 1970s, it was not common for a person to see or know a homosexual, or, whether it was a gay man or a lesbian. We live in a different society nowadays. So the purpose of these protests were really to confront society and say, look, here we are, we're puffs, we're dykes, we're not that different after all from you.
What was the route of that morning parade, do you remember?
Look, I know it was along George Street, but I can't remember actually where it went. I do have it in the notes, but I'm trying to rely on my memory, and this is the problem with me at times. Trying to rely on what I know and what I remember are two different things, and the line sometimes between them is very fine.
Do you remember if there were many police at that morning protest?
Look, normally you would see police at any demonstrations, but they would not have been they would have done their job. They would not have caused any problems. I mean, there must have been some police because they would have had to direct the traffic and everything like that. But it wasn't, there was no problem as far as I remember.
There was an event at Paddington Town Hall.
Yes.
Were you present?
There again, I'm trying to remember. I actually managed to locate, I think when I went to Alga, I managed to locate evidence that I was present. Again, I don't have any, I know what happened. I know that there were people who gave, different speeches, say about Chile, about Europe, the situation of gay men and lesbians in other parts of the world. But other than that, my gut feeling is I think I would have been there for a short time. I don't think I attended all of it.
The evening parade.
Evening parade.
So it began at Taylor Square around 10:30?
Okay, it was scheduled to start at 10. It did not start until 10:30. Okay, that was the reason for that, of course, was not because Lance Gowland was late, but it was because there were very few people. And by 10:30, a reasonable amount of people had turned up to make the demonstration, or I shouldn't say demonstration, Ron Austin would kill me, the street party. Actually, I called it as basically an event with no name, because we called it Mardi Gras Street Party Festival and that sort of stuff. Basically, there weren't the amount of people that we thought was sufficient to make it a decent. So it ended up starting at about 10:30.
So what was the kind of numbers, do you remember?
Yes, look, people have estimated, a range of numbers. From the research that I have done, I think it would be closer to 300 than 500. It would not have gone beyond 500, most definitely. In fact, 500 would have been, the sort of estimate that we activists would have given.
You mentioned Lance. What was his role?
Oh, Lance virtually did everything when it came to Mardi Gras. I mean, we have people nowadays claiming, that they did this, that, and the other. After Ron Austin thought of the idea, he went to discuss it with Lance, Kim Skidder, and Jim Walker at their home in Enmore. Lance, whom I interviewed, specifically warned them that the Gay Solidarity Group would not be interested in that sort of event because that's not the way we did things. And at the end of the day, what they basically told them, the Gay Solidarity Group, look, if you want to do a Mardi Gras, do it, organize it yourselves. So we had Lance Gowland applying for the permit. We had Lance Gowland applying or getting the truck, the flatback Hertz truck. We had Lance Gowland getting the sound system. We had Lance Gowland and some of his friends, including Graham Chuck, making decisions on the music. We had Lance Gowland driving the truck. We had Lance Gowland getting into trouble with the truck, with the police. We had the police trying to arrest Lance Gowland. So, I simply asked the question, what other work did people do?
What was the kind of support from the greater community, LGBT community, towards that evening parade?
Okay. Well, this is interesting because what we're dealing with, I mean, there are some people who claim that there was a great divide between the bar scene, the rest of the community, and us, the elite, the activists. Some, of course, were more elite than the rest of the elites. People who saw themselves as being at the vanguard of the revolution, but others, unfortunately, saw them as being on the fringe of the movement. You see, up until 78, the movement had failed to basically draw the support of what I can call ordinary gay men and lesbians. Okay, people who weren't socialists, who weren't anarchists, who weren't Marxists, who weren't waiting for the revolution, on and on and on. We did very little to help them. In fact, in here I've got, I've got something that was put out by the Melbourne University Gay Liberation, and it goes something like this: there's one basic thing wrong with gay men, they're men, unfortunately. Okay, now that sort of language, and it was very, very common, okay, really alienated most members of our community, our tribe, basically, because we were a tribe. But the idea of a street party, was really something quite incredible, because when we started moving down and people started to go into the bars and to scream out of the bars and into the streets, all of a sudden these people came out and joined us. I mean, they didn't all stay, on the footpath. There is a report, in fact, of about 27 Carmen Mirandas waiting at cabs to join us, with fruit on their head.
That was Capriccios.
Capriccios. Yes, yes. So that was the first one, you see. And no, I don't know whether there were 27, it's probably less, but that would have been the atmosphere. So, the support was there. I think when people talk about the gay scene in Oxford Street, which was basically, colonized by men, gay men, as, have gay men being closeted. I mean, haven't these people ever gone to Oxford Street? I mean, we used to walk down hand in hand, kiss publicly. We used to go to places, I don't know whether it was open, like Numbers. And it was basically sex on premises venue, and, a lot of the gay men, I can speak about the gay men because, I mean, that's the company I kept. We were quite open about our sexuality. The idea that we lacked political consciousness or we were closeted is just silly in the extreme.
As the parade went down Oxford Street, what was the atmosphere like?
Oh, it was great. I remember, for example, there was a sense of frivolity, a sense of campness, a sense of let's have fun. You met friends, you said hello to them, you eyed past lovers, the usual thing that happens when you get a group of gay men and lesbians together. The atmosphere was great. There was certainly a feeling that, the police were trying to hurry us up.
So there were police there at that point?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Were they intimidating?
No, I don't think they were intimidating. In fact, Ron Austin has told me that when he was waiting at Taylor Square, a number of police had actually gone and met them and wished them the best of luck for that evening. There is a report that the police were not told about the event. That's the Darlinghurst police. Lance Goulden does not believe they weren't told at all. He thinks that they didn't like the idea of having a bunch of gay men and lesbians, raving around with a bloody truck. I mean, you just, can you imagine it, at about 10 o'clock, there's all these gay men and lesbians, coming out. By 10:30, people dressed up, and police have to sort of manage them. I mean, it must have been a nightmare for them. What do you do? They had other work to do.
So the police were sort of hurrying the parade a little
Hurrying,
bit.
yes.
Was it everybody or just Lance?
Well, Lance was up the front, of course.
He was in the truck, wasn't
he? Yes. And once you see, and music was being played, and once, if they had succeeded to get him moving, then the parade would have finished earlier, and that was the main aim of the police.
Do you remember any of the songs on Lance's track?
Oh yes, I mean there was the Tom Robinson one. Sing If You're Glad to Be Gay. There was Meg Christensen's Ode to a Gym Teacher. There was also Graham Chuck speaks of some other kind of music that a friend of his, Marcello, actually had there. So there was a variety of music, but of course, that was the period of Motown. I mean, we didn't have Fly Robin Fly or You Sexy Thing or anything like that, although Lance would have loved that. Lance loved a party. But the two main songs were Meg Christensen's and Tom Robinson's.
Do you remember if there were any other vehicles?
Well, I was under the impression that there weren't. Okay, and if anyone had asked me, a month or so ago, I would have sworn that there wasn't. But now it appears that there was another vehicle at the back of the parade, a combi van that was driven by Acceptance. Now, I am usually quite skeptical when people turn around and say, I mean, I work as a lawyer, so I tend to look at the evidence. I'm usually quite skeptical, but putting it into context, the fact that the van was there in the morning march, the fact that it was at the back of the parade, which suggests to me that some of the organisers, in inverted commas, the gay solidarity group, would not have liked it. The fact that Gary Pye and the rest of the Christian activists were abused, I think Gary Pye would have been furious. There would have been Grab Donkin. They were activists. They were no nonsense people, and I cannot imagine Gary Pye not making sure that there was that their group acceptors was not represented. So I would think that it's more likely than not that the combi van was at the back of the van.
As the parade went down Oxford Street, am I right in thinking that people came out of the bars?
Absolutely.
Did people go into the bars to get them out?
Yes, and I think I was one of those who actually went into cabs. We were just, screaming and happy, out of the bars and into the streets. Only God knows what they thought of us. And a lot of people did join. And you see, the whole point of that particular street party parade was that a lot of people from the bars joined us. Now, Oxford Street, of course, was mainly was basically gay men's bars. There were a couple of lesbian bars, and I know I have said a couple of lesbian bars, and a lot of people will now say that there was only one. In fact, there were two. That was further up in Crown Street. So the ones that really made the street party what it was were the people who came out of the bars. Without them, I think we would have had another, walk down the street from Taylor Square to Hyde Park, and that would have been the end of it.
The parade went down Oxford Street. It
Yes.
went towards Hyde Park.
Hyde Park.
At what point did trouble start?
I think the trouble started probably past or around Patches. Because I think the police became more aggressive. It's very difficult to actually pinpoint, we would all have different memories, but I would imagine that that's where the problem started. You see, it wasn't just the police, okay, it was also us. I'm not blaming ourselves, okay, for the trouble, but what had happened was that we were all dressed up. And, by the time we arrived at Patches, we knew that it would only be a few more feet, and, we were all dressed up with nowhere to go. So we wanted to party.
What sort of numbers at this point?
Well, I think at this point, you're probably looking at something like probably 800, I would say. I wouldn't sort of overestimate, but I would say that's probably, and 800 is a pretty big crowd.
And Lance was grabbed by the police?
Lance was at some stage, I think in College Street, was grabbed by the police. He was pulled out of the van, out of the truck, and apparently, some lesbians took him away and changed his clothes, put a hat on his head, and off he went. But there is a report of actually two people, a newspaper report of two people having been arrested in College Street.
So you went to College Street. Lance Carmel had been taken out of the truck. You went to College Street. What did the permit cover exactly? What was the permit covering? What route?
Look, I think the simple answer to that is I don't know and nobody knows. I understand that the City Council was looking for a copy of the permit. Now, the permits were granted by the police, not by the council. Okay, the Summary Offences Act gave the police the authority to issue the permit, grant a consent, I think the phrase is, but they obviously would have had to consult with the local council, okay, to get their opinion. What everybody thought of was, what we all thought of, was that we had permission to stop in front of the bars, to have a party in Pelican Street, to stop and start reading telegrams and all of that in Hyde Park and have a bit of a Hyde Parky party at Hyde Park. But I don't think the permit allowed any of that.
So then you went down William Street. Were people running or walking?
Well, I think people went down William Street in different directions. Okay, we didn't go all in one group. Some people went down William Street, other people went down Stanley, other people went down Francis Street, I think, or Francis Avenue, and then we sort of met up somewhere out. It was all sort of disjointed, you know, terribly disorganized. And along the way, we sang and carried on, and you know, did our own little thing.
But you weren't feeling nervous or anything?
No, we were quite happy. It was still, you see, that's the other thing, that the whole, some people now talk about it having turned into a protest. Yes, there was an element of protest to it, but I think for most people were protesting at the very fact that the police had stopped us partying. You know, we weren't really talking about you know, our right to use the streets. I mean, all of that would have been in the minds of some of the activists, you know, or all in the minds of all of us. But, you know, as I said, most of the people there would not have been activists.
Why do you think the police stopped you partying?
Well, I think they knew that the permit basically said it was only up to Hyde Park. And they wanted to get rid of us. You know, I mean, police don't want a group of, you know, men and women, you know, whether they're socialists, homosexuals or Christians, you know, making a nuisance of themselves at one end of the park. You know, so they wanted to get back to their jobs, you know, and have a cup of coffee. I've got no doubt. You know, we were a nuisance.
So you went to Darlinghurst Road?
Yes.
And you went towards the fountain, the El Alamein fountain?
Yes, I don't remember going that far. I remember sort of going towards the beginning of Darlinghurst Road, really, where a lot of the action took place.
Do you remember the police?
Absolutely.
Is it true that they sort of surrounded everybody?
Well, what they did is they sandwiched us from both ends. They also blocked the side streets, so we basically had nowhere to go.
Were you given any opportunities to leave?
I don't remember being given any opportunity to leave, but we couldn't have left anyway.
How did you feel?
Oh, I think we were still quite, you know, surprised, but still in a party mood, a sense of, you know, defiance. You didn't want us to party, you know, in Hyde Park. So here we are, we're partying in King's Cross.
At what point did the police start using action on people?
Yes, I think from memory it was towards probably 11:30, and I stand to be corrected here. But at some stage, some of the vans drove into the middle of the main strip. Lights were shone, and they started, you know, hacking their way through people. I mean,
with batons?
I don't remember batons, but I remember a lot of physical movement.
So fists?
Fists, yes.
Did you see any blood?
No, I didn't see any blood. One of the things I remember is being part of a crowd, and, you know, the crowd being like a wave, you know, moving forward as the police sort of went away from us, and as soon as they turned towards us, we sort of would go back. So there was that sense of, you know, yes, there's a fight on, but, you know, we're here together.
Do you remember people being dragged into vans?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Were people screaming?
Yes, there was a lot of noise, a lot of screaming, yes.
Verbal abuse?
Look, I think from memory, you know, there were chants like "Let them go, let them go," which was, of course, repeated at the Darlinghurst police station. Let them go was one of them. Stop police attacks on gays, women and black. What was very interesting, though, with Taylor's, with King's Cross, I don't know whether the police would have been. Oh, the interesting thing is that on the 29th of May, Kemp had actually suggested the street party, and their original plan was to basically go to Hyde Park and return, okay, back to where it started, okay. That was, I think, the original plan, and then it was simply from Taylor Square to Hyde Park. So that's really how the whole thing evolved. But in terms of King's Cross, what was very interesting is that if the police thought that moving us away from the bars was their way of saving the day, you know, because if they had attacked us in Oxford Street, they would probably have created a crisis, because the gay men would have come out of the bars, and that was the period of the clone. Some of them, of course, thought that they were very aggro, but they would have created problems for the police. So it may well be that the police said, let's not let them go back to Oxford Street, let's push them away somewhere else. And Taylor Square, King's Cross, of course, they probably thought would not be very gay and lesbian friendly.
But people did come out of the bars in King's Cross, didn't they?
Oh, people came out from everywhere, because anyone who was anybody in King's Cross, I mean, if you were in King's Cross around midnight or 12:30, you know, you probably were up to no good. I mean, you weren't going to visit your grandmother or go to church or anything like that. You were probably going to the girly bars, or you were going to have a drink with friends. But all of a sudden, what the police did is they came up not against gay men and lesbians only, but against all of their enemies in King's Cross. The people who worked as prostitutes, the people who were spruikers, the people who were basically who had been given a very hard time by the police, including writers, you know, everyone in King's Cross really, or no, I shouldn't say everyone, many people in King's Cross did not like the police. So all of a sudden, you know, they had this bunch of gay men and lesbians, you know, fighting the police, and they said, you know, great, let's join in. So the police were faced with this huge crowd of a you know, that was very diverse.
How many people were arrested?
Well, at the first instance, there were 53. There were 30 men and 23 women.
At what point did the police disperse?
Look, at some stage, I think it was probably about half an hour later, they decided they probably had enough. I mean, this is something that the police had never expected. They thought, you know, that we'll go in 5 minutes, we'll clear this bloody lot, and they ended up, you know, there for about half an hour. Then I think they realized that they had arrested a number of people, and they took everyone to Darlinghurst police station.
And how were you feeling once the police had gone?
Oh, pissed off like everyone else. You know, I mean, people were arrested basically for what? You know, this was King's Cross. I mean, people went to King's Cross to party.
So what did you do? Did you go straight to Darlinghurst police station?
Yes. We walked up Darlinghurst Road, past the wall, and only God knows what those people, you know, thought of us. And we sang a variety of things. In fact, I need to get it right. But, you know, some of the things that basically we sang, you know, things like, for example, let them go, stop police attacks on gays, women and black. There was one about something, what will we do with the cops come the revolution? What will we do with the bourgeoisie? You know, we'll burn down their shops. So, I mean, can you imagine all these gay men doing the beat, you know, and us walking up, screaming and carrying on?
And you got to Darlinghurst police station. What sort of numbers were outside?
That's probably a bit difficult to tell, but I would imagine we're talking in the hundreds. You know, probably 3, 4, might even be 5.
And people were still chanting these slogans.
Well, we were probably. What I remember is "Let them go," and "Stop police attacks." They were the ones, but there were other songs, you know, that were sung. Like there was one that ended up like "Give gays a chance" or something like that. But it was, you know, I mean, you could feel that there was this sense of community out there. There was also an incident, I think, where someone was driving a car, some straight guy, and he screamed abuse at us. And he ended up mounting the curb, as unfortunately that I did a couple of days ago. He went straight into a wall, and some gay guy called him "you boring straight" or something like that. So there was a sense of, you know, frivolity still. I mean,
And is it true that the prisoners could hear chants from outside?
oh, I mean, I don't know whether they could hear, but it would have been very difficult not to hear.
And I understand bail money was raised.
Yes, yes, yes. There was a lot of money raised, and
How
the
was that
bars.
done?
Well, it was done by people contributing, but also by the bars. Some of the bars contributing. Geoffrey McCarthy actually was going around and collecting money for bail, and there is a report that Craig Johnston apparently at one stage approached him and told him, "Look, we don't need any more money because we've got money from the bars." Peter, for example, people like John, oh goodness, I've got a bit, Goulden, and you know, they had Kemp money,
Hmm.
and they got it. You know, Kemp had a dance that night, so they had money from there. And in fact, it was John Goulden, wasn't it, who actually?
It could have been.
It's a couple, and I might be getting the wrong person.
Because there were no ATMs or banks.
Oh no, we didn't even have
Open.
mobiles or anything like that. But anyway, somebody from Kemp actually went and got the money and gave it to Lance, and Lance didn't like him, although they were both members of Kemp, and apparently gave him a kiss, which surprised him tremendously. The other thing I wanted to say about Lance, you asked me the question earlier on, what did Lance do? You see, a little known fact is that Lance Gowland was in fact a representative of Kemp on the Gay Solidarity Group. Now that is supported by documents. Okay, so there is no question that it was or it wasn't. There's actually documentary evidence to that.
So, do you know how much bail money was raised? Approximately.
I'm again guessing. I think there is a report that there was about $5,000.
And were the prisoners released pretty quickly?
No. It's we now have effects. No, they took their time because at some stage the women were moved out. They were taken into a central police station, and they started to come out around 4 o'clock in the morning. I imagine the same thing happened. I stayed there till about 3 o'clock, I think.
And so they went to court. Were the charges dismissed?
Look, what happens is this. Apologies for the facts. I'll just what happens is this. When people appeared, you know, the matters were adjourned, and at some stage, I think it was in January '79, that the police withdrew all the charges. Okay, now it's, I think, important to understand this legal concept of withdrawing the charges. Okay, what happens is when there is an offence, okay, each offence has a number of elements to it. Okay, it might have 3, 4, 5 elements. Now, at some stage, the prosecution, that is after the charges are laid, looks at the elements of the offence, and it's quite probable that 1 or 2 of those elements, or all of them, may not have been met. The problem for the police, I think, was that they arrested and charged so many. Okay, because you can imagine if you arrest 6, 7, 8 people, you're not going to remember. And I think that's, you know, who did what. And I think that's what happened at the end. You know, the police just, I mean, they didn't have time to take a notebook and write notes as they do nowadays.
Did many well-known people come out in support of those arrested, such as politicians or people in the media, or was there quite a bit of silence?
Okay, in terms of the politicians, I don't know of any. I know that Premier Wren wasn't terribly friendly. In fact, the Labour Party wasn't terribly friendly, notwithstanding what some people say. I would imagine, however, people like George Peterson, who was a Labour Party member of Parliament, and the Socialists would have come out in support. I would be very, very surprised if he didn't. But I think what happened after the Mardi Gras, or what is interesting after the Mardi Gras, is the reaction of other gay men and lesbians. You see, on the 15th of July, there was that incident where, during the Drop the Charges rally, where a number of activists threw flour at the door of the police station. Now, there had already been a suspicion that the problems with the first Mardi Gras started with the extremists, okay, but nobody could point, any finger or their finger at anybody. So the 15th of July incident, I think, confirmed it in the minds of people that here was an element that really was creating problems. In fact, Campaign did make mention of that straight after the first Mardi Gras. So they were the problems, and later on, if we look at the whole numbers, they sort of dwindled. During the event of the 4th of November 1978, there were only about 250 people who turned up for the protest. So there was a great deal of skepticism in the movement. We were certainly no heroes, let me put it bluntly.
Was there much reporting in what existed of the gay media back then?
Oh, absolutely.
Was it supportive?
Well, it depends where you're looking, how you're looking at it. For example, if I can point, and I'll give you one, in July 78, for example, there was a report in Campaign, and it was very, very, very supportive, okay? But it did have this to say, that at the same time, we must beware of the forces that will attempt to divide us, the bureaucracy of government, the intimidation of the police, the self-serving ideologies of extremist groups, okay? So there was already that sense, that there were some people in there who were part of the movement, who were pushing their agenda onto everyone else. So yes, Campaign was political, okay, because Campaign, after all, had been started by gay men. Not surprisingly, it was more concerned with gay men. I mean, that's obvious. But it was also very critical of certain aspects of the movement.
How do you feel about Mardi Gras now?
Oh, it's delightful. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, here is an event with no name. As I said, we call it Festival, Street Party, Mardi Gras. Thanks to Mark McMahon, she named it. To think that an event like that ended up being such an important event in the calendar of Sydney is incredible. I have no concerns about it being less political. I think it is political. I think, for example, when we went to the bars, we were being very political. We were insisting on being with our tribe. We were insisting on making love to people whom we like. So I think it is still very, very political, but it's different to the way some of the old guard see politics.
What advice would you give to the organisers? You said you really enjoy it still. Is there any advice you'd give to improve it? But
probably make it a little bit longer, because I think you start off and it's so delightful, and all of a sudden it's finished. I think we must make sure that we won't tolerate a situation where people will try to push their particular ideologies onto the movement. We've changed, and that's the way. I'm quite happy with the Mardi Gras. I think the way the Mardi Gras is today is in fact closer to what Rod Austin had envisaged, because it was a celebration. It wasn't a protest.
When you're on that 78 bus and the crowd is going wild and cheering you all on, how do you feel?
Oh, I mean, in a way you're humbled, because I don't see myself as a hero, but if we were heroes, we were accidental ones. we certainly had no plans to become a hero. And really, it's, as with that event, there's a great deal of myth building, but that's quite all right. That happens with the maturity of any group, any collection of people. So there's nothing wrong with that. Mardi Gras is not just about what happened in 1978. It's also about what's happening now.
So back then in 1978, you had no idea that it would become the thing it is today?
Absolutely not. We were, if anything, the best we would have hoped for would be that it would be a footnote in the history of gay and lesbian Sydney. Nothing more. On
to the apologies. So we started off this year, 2016, with the Parliamentary Apology. How did you feel about that?
Oh, it was great. I actually made a decision to go only about 2 days before the apology. I live in Melbourne, of course. I decided to travel to Sydney. And when I went there, it was incredible. My only disappointment was that there weren't, and I'm not sort of trying to bash any political party, but I think sometimes the Liberal Party is its own worst enemy, and I think there should have been more people supporting what Bruce Notley-Smith said.
We also had an apology from Fairfax. Do you think that was sincere?
Well, I think it's a question, not so much a question of sincerity. I think it is sincere. After all, the media nowadays is not the same sort of media that was around in the 1970s. It's very leftish. So I think it was sincere. But I think what we've got to look at when we look at the newspaper apology is actually examine what happened before 78, okay? And before 78, it was common practice, okay, as the newspaper said, to have these things published. Now, when I say common practice, I'm not saying that it published the names, the ages, the profession, and the address, excluding the street number. That they did it on each and every occasion, but it was common practice. I've been doing some research, and you can find this stuff going back to the 1800s. But you don't have to go and check with newspapers. If anyone looks at Kemp as a row of tents, the life and times of Sydney's Kemp social clubs, which is put out by the Pride History Group, you will see that in 1956, Truth published, and I quote, their names, jobs, and addresses. Okay, so this happened. It was common practice, and it was routine practice, and by routine it means frequently and without any proper consideration to the outcome. Now, I don't know anybody who suffered adversely from it, so I cannot talk. I imagine there were, and of course that's regrettable. But I think what's happening now is that people are confusing, the issue of whether or not those names should be published. That is, after a person is charged, whether it's fair to publish that name or their details. There's an argument there, and I work as a lawyer, so it's never nice to see your client, mentioned in a newspaper, especially when you believe that they're not guilty. But that's one argument. We could have all different points of view. The fact of what happened in Mardi Gras doesn't necessarily make it malicious. Okay, I'm not saying it wasn't, but that has to go to the mind of the person.
And finally, the apology we had was on the police. How did you feel about that? And you were present.
I was present. Well, I was present by accident, because that morning I was going to listen to some tapes at the Pride History Group, and at the last minute I decided to change my plans and to go to this media briefing. I was taken by surprise. Look, I think the police apologized for the nature of policing in the 1970s. I think they have a lot to apologize for in that regard. I'm not really worried as to whether or not the commissioner does it. It was done with his blessing. I think we've got to move on, basically.
And a couple more questions. Back then in 1978, one of the messages were people were trying to get across activists was gay liberation. Now, one of the messages of Mardi Gras seems to be a lot about equality, particularly marriage equality. Do you feel there's a contradiction between the two, liberation and equality, or can they work hand in hand?
Yeah, I think they're different concepts, but I don't think they're contradictory. When we talk about equality, I think we're generally talking about legal equality. So we're talking about equality in the law, in other words, the legislation itself not being discriminatory against gay men and lesbians. And I'm talking about gay men and lesbians because that's really what Mardi Gras was about. But we're also talking about something else there, and we're also talking about the heteronormativity of legislation not being there. So it's not just about changing the laws, to avoid direct discrimination, but changing the very nature of the laws so that you get rid of this heteronormativity. The second thing, of course, is equality before the law. In other words, the way judges deal with gay men and lesbians, the way police deal with men, gay and lesbians. I mean, we have sodomy, for example, legislation, which in a way affects both straights and gay. But the way it was enforced was to the detriment of gay men, not to the detriment of heterosexuals. So when it comes to equality, the struggle for equality, I think there's an end in sight. It is achievable. When it comes to liberation, I don't think there is ever an end in sight. I think liberation is, the first question we have to ask is liberation from what? Okay, and my view is liberation from the structures of society that do not support us, but also the structures, or apart from the structures, also from our own attitudes, from our own internalized homophobia. That is really what liberation is also about.
What advice do you have for the young activists of today?
Well, I wouldn't dare give advice to young activists because I never took any advice. The advice I would give would be to everybody, and it would be to actually be a close observer of the history of gay men and lesbians, but also when you look at that history, to make sure that you don't just swallow what we tell you. You've got to make up your own mind. You've got to make up your own research, because we all come to this, if I can put the word game, with our own different political baggage.
What advice would you have given your younger self with all the lessons you've learned in the meantime?
Oh, I think there is one advice I would have given myself. It has nothing to do with ideology. It has everything to do with getting myself a camera and the tape recorder or something like that. That's the only thing I regret.
And finally, what are your hopes for the future?
Oh, I think in Australia, we forget how far we have come, and we also forget that we have, we are indebted to the police in 1978. If it were not for the police, we would not have Mardi Gras as we have it today. So in a strange way, we have a lot to thank them for.
Joseph, thank you very much.
You're welcome.